me, Jess, Jack, and Tara all buzzing with excitement. We were headed to a secluded cabin in the middle of the forest, a perfect getaway from our city lives. As we drove deeper into the woods, the GPS signal grew weaker, and we found ourselves relying on printed directions and Jack's questionable sense of direction.
Are you sure we're going the right way, Jack?
Of course. Trust me, I've got this.
I hope so. This place is starting to look really isolated.
We laughed, but there was a hint of nervousness in our voices. The adventure had truly begun. By the time we arrived, dusk had settled in, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The cabin looked exactly like the photos, charming and rustic, but in the dim light it took on a more sinister appearance. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches like skeletal fingers against the sky.
Can someone help me with the keys?
Jess fumbled with the keys and we finally got inside. The place was cozy, with a large fireplace and wooden furniture. We unpacked quickly, eager to start a fire and relax.
This place is perfect. Let's get that fire going.
Hey guys, look what I found.
Tara found an old guest book on a shelf and started flipping through it.
Listen to this. Had a great time but heard strange noises at night. Probably just animals, but it was creepy.
Oh, come on, it's probably just some overactive imagination.
We all just laughed it off. We were far from civilization, so of course the night sounds would be different. We settled in, making dinner and sharing stories around the fire. By the time we went to bed, the cabin felt almost homey. In the dead of night, I woke up to a faint, persistent scratching sound. It was coming from outside my window. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a branch or some small animal. I closed my eyes, willing myself to ignore it. But then I heard it again, this time a lot louder. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the window. The moonlight was bright enough to cast eerie shadows, but I couldn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to turn away, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting amongst the trees. I froze watching, but nothing else stirred. The next morning, I told the others.
It's probably nothing, just the wind.
Let's just keep the door and windows locked tonight.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
We all agreed, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over us. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the woods. It wasn't like any animal sound we'd ever heard before. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel outside the cabin.
What the hell is that?
Tara whimpered, clutching my arm. Jack whispered, his face pale in the candlelight.
The footsteps grew closer, circling the cabin. We heard scratching at the door, more insistent this time. I grabbed a fireplace poker, my hands shaking. Suddenly, the door rattled violently as if somebody or something was trying to force it open. We backed away, terrified. Jess grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. We were on our own. The rattling stopped as abruptly as it had begun. We stood in tense silence, straining to hear any sounds. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance.
We stayed awake all night, too scared to sleep. When the morning came, we packed up and left as quickly as possible. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. It stood silent and empty, but I knew we'd never forget those terrifying sounds in the night. We never spoke of it again, but the fear lingered, a chilling reminder of our weekend in the forest. Last fall, my friends and I decided to camp in the remote parts of Blackwood Forest. We were seasoned campers, confident in our skills and looking for an adventure. We pitched our tents in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees that blocked out most of the light. It felt isolated, perfect for our getaway.
Yeah, it was supposed to be the perfect escape from everything. Little did we know what awaited us in those woods.
The first night was uneventful, filled with laughter and stories around the campfire. But on the second night, things took a turn for the worst. It started with feelings of being watched around. At midnight, we heard the first sound, a soft crunching of leaves like footsteps. We shone our flashlights into the darkness but saw nothing. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. We laughed it off nervously and went back to our tents.
I just started to drift off when I heard it again, closer this time. I sat up, straining to hear. There it was, the unmistakable sound of someone or something walking around our campsite. I held my breath, my heart pounding. The steps circled our tents, moving methodically. Suddenly I shouted, "Who was there?"
The footsteps stopped. We waited, listening. Then came the sound of something scratching against the fabric of Mark's tent. He unzipped his tent and shone his flashlight out, but there was nothing there. Just a dark, silent forest. None of us slept that night. We sat together, keeping the fire burning, too scared to close our eyes. The footsteps continued, sometimes close, sometimes far, always just out of sight. Dawn finally broke, and the sound ceased. Exhausted and unnerved, we decided to pack up and leave. As we were breaking camp, I noticed something. That sent chills down my spine. Around our campsite, in the soft dirt, were footprints. But these were no ordinary footprints. They were huge, almost twice the size of a human foot, with long, claw-like toes. We looked at each other, realizing whatever had been stalking us was not human. We left in a hurry, not looking back. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night in Blackwood Forest. We've all agreed never to return, and I still get chills thinking about the silent stalker that walked circles around our camp that night.
It was supposed to be a quick day hike in the Pine Barrens. I had taken the trail many times before, a well-marked-out path leading to a beautiful overlook. But that day, something was different. The forest seemed unusually quiet, the air heavy with an oppressive stillness. I was about halfway to the overlook when I noticed the path ahead looked different, as if it had shifted somehow. I stopped, puzzled. The trail markers, usually bright and clear, were faded, almost invisible. I pressed on, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. A few minutes later, I came across something that stopped me cold. The path split in two. There had never been a fork here before,